Have you ever wondered what happens when the very person who has always been giving, forgiving, and bending finally stops? What happens when the empath, who has lived their life carrying everyone else's pain, decides to use the same tactics that were once used to control them? In that moment, the story changes. The one who was once powerless begins to rise. The game that once seemed unbreakable starts to collapse, and the narcissist, who thrived on predictability, finds themselves face to face with a truth they cannot control. This is not the empath becoming cruel. This is not the empath turning into what they once suffered under. This is the empath awakening, embracing their hidden strength and stepping into balance. This is the moment when silence becomes power, when boundaries become unshakable, and when the empath finally discovers the freedom that was within them all along. There comes a moment in the life of every empath when the world no longer feels the same. What once felt like a calling to love, to give, to heal, begins to feel like a burden too heavy to carry. The empath, who has spent years offering compassion and understanding to those who cannot return it, eventually arrives at a threshold. It is not sudden, yet when it happens, it feels like an awakening that can never be reversed. This turning point is born out of exhaustion, but it is also born out of truth. The empath begins to realize that constantly giving without balance has left them drained, disoriented, and questioning their own worth. The heart that was once so open begins to sense that something essential has been missing all along. It is not love that is absent, for love still flows abundantly. What is absent is balance, and what is absent is strength. You see, the empath is not weak. The empath is powerful, but that power has been hidden beneath layers of kindness and fear of hurting others. This hidden power waits in the shadows, waiting for the moment when the empath is finally ready to step into it. The turning point comes when the empath can no longer survive in the old patterns of self-sacrifice. It comes when the soul begins to whisper that compassion without boundaries is not compassion at all, but self-betrayal. At this stage, something profound begins to shift inside. The empath recognizes that their greatest gift, the ability to feel deeply, has also been their greatest vulnerability in the hands of those who seek control. The narcissist thrives on this openness. They thrive on the empath's endless willingness to forgive, to understand, to bend. But eventually, the empath sees the pattern clearly. They see that love without limits becomes an invitation for manipulation, and forgiveness without wisdom becomes permission for abuse. This recognition is the beginning of transformation. The turning point is not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It is about reclaiming what was lost in the name of love. It is about standing in the truth that empathy must flow in both directions, that to truly honor others, the empath must also honor themselves. This is not a rejection of compassion. It is compassion elevated to a higher form. It is love that no longer depletes but instead nourishes both the giver and the receiver. In this awakening, the empath confronts a part of themselves that has been denied for too long. This hidden part is strong, assertive, and unafraid of conflict. It is the part that says no without apology, the part that withdraws when boundaries are crossed, the part that refuses to carry the pain of another as if it were their own. The empath once believed this side was dangerous, too harsh, or unkind. But now they see it differently. They see that within this hidden strength lies their true balance. Without it, empathy becomes weakness. With it, empathy becomes wisdom. This confrontation with the self is not always easy. At first, the empath may feel guilt for withdrawing their energy, for no longer being available at every moment, for letting silence speak instead of endless explanations. They may question if they are becoming like the one who hurt them. But slowly they come to see the difference. The narcissist uses tactics to control and to dominate, while the empath chooses them consciously to protect and to restore balance. One acts from fear, the other from truth. This distinction allows the empath to embrace their shadow without losing their light, When this inner shift occurs, the world around the empath begins to change. Those who once fed on their energy feel unsettled. They cannot understand why their familiar strategies no longer work. They feel the silence where once there was endless explanation. They feel the distance where once there was constant availability. And in that unsettling, the empath begins to experience freedom. For the first time, they are not chained to another's approval. They are no longer trapped in the cycle of giving without receiving. They are no longer the predictable source of energy that can be drained at will. The empath begins to notice something beautiful happening inside. With each step of reclaiming their strength, they feel lighter. With every boundary upheld, they feel clearer. With every moment of choosing themselves, they feel more alive. What was once hidden in the shadows now shines with undeniable power. The empath realizes they do not need to abandon their sensitivity to protect themselves. They simply need to honor it with the strength that has always been waiting within. This is the turning point where the empath is no longer defined by sacrifice but by wholeness. They see that to live fully, they must embrace all parts of themselves, not just the gentle and forgiving ones, but also the strong and unyielding ones. They recognize that true compassion includes the self, and from this place of balance, they no longer fear the tactics of the narcissist. For now, they hold within them both light and shadow, both love and strength, and it is this integration that makes them unbreakable. The moment the empath embraces this truth is the moment their entire story begins to change. Imagine what happens the moment the empath finally stops responding in the way the narcissist has come to expect. For so long, the pattern has been predictable. The narcissist provokes and the empath explains. The narcissist withholds and the empath tries harder. The narcissist twists reality and the empath bends themselves into painful shapes just to restore peace. It is a dance that repeats again and again because the narcissist depends on the certainty of the empath's reaction. But then something remarkable occurs. The empath begins to shift. Instead of pleading, they go quiet. Instead of giving endless energy, they conserve it. Instead of chasing, they withdraw. What was once so automatic suddenly stops, and in that moment the narcissist feels the ground move beneath their feet. The game no longer feels like theirs to control. This is the shock of role reversal. The narcissist, who has relied on the empath's openness, now finds themselves staring at a mirror. When they raise their voice and there is no emotional response, when they attempt manipulation and are met with calm silence, they feel exposed. Their strategies only work when there is a willing participant. Without the expected reaction, they have nothing to grasp. It is unsettling for them because what they see reflected is their own behavior stripped of its disguise. When the empath chooses silence, the narcissist is confronted with the same coldness they once inflicted. When the empath creates distance, the narcissist experiences the very abandonment they used as a weapon. When the empath stops giving, the narcissist feels the emptiness of their own lack. This reversal is not meant as cruelty, but it shakes the narcissist deeply because for the first time they are forced to feel what they have long denied within themselves. The empath, on the other hand, feels something new stirring within. At first, it may be uncomfortable, even frightening, to withhold where they once gave. They may wonder if they are doing something wrong, but with time, they recognize the difference. They are not punishing, they are protecting. They are not manipulating, they are reclaiming. This distinction allows the empath to step into a new kind of strength without losing their essence. As the roles shift, the narcissist begins to panic. Their sense of control depends on predictability, and now that predictability is gone, they may increase their tactics, testing the empath with greater intensity, hoping to pull them back into the old dynamic. But the empath, standing in their newfound power, does not move in the same way. They may listen without reacting. They may walk away without argument. They may simply refuse to engage at all. In that stillness, the narcissist is left with themselves, and that is their greatest fear. The role reversal also exposes the fragility of the narcissist's mask. For so long it seemed as if they were unshakable, always in control, always holding the upper hand. Yet when the empath mirrors back the very tactics once used against them, the mask begins to slip. The narcissist is forced to confront their dependency on the empath's reactions, and suddenly it is clear that the power was never truly theirs. It was borrowed from the empath all along. For the empath, this realization is liberating. They begin to see that the chains were never as strong as they once believed. Their reactions, their giving, their constant availability were the very things that fed the dynamic. By withdrawing them, they step out of the game entirely. They no longer need to fight or explain or prove. They only need to hold their ground in silence and in clarity. The shock of this reversal is not only for the narcissist, it is also for the empath, who discovers how much power they truly hold. They learn that they can choose when to give and when to withhold, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to stay and when to walk away. They realize they are not trapped by their sensitivity, but guided by it. Sensitivity, when balanced with strength, becomes wisdom. What makes this moment so transformative is that it is not about revenge. The empath is not becoming the narcissist. They are not using tactics to dominate or control. They are using them consciously to create balance, to protect their energy, to stand in truth. This conscious choice is what makes all the difference. It allows the empath to integrate what was once hidden without losing their essence of compassion. And as the narcissist struggles to regain control, the empath finds freedom in no longer playing the role of the victim. They no longer fear the silence. They no longer fear rejection. They no longer fear losing approval. What once felt like unbearable pain becomes a source of strength. What once felt like the end of connection becomes the beginning of self-respect. The shock of this reversal is that it changes everything. The narcissist can no longer rely on old patterns, and the empath can no longer be trapped by them. The dynamic that once defined the relationship collapses, and in that collapse, the empath steps into a new story. This is the moment when the one who was once controlled becomes the one who is free. There comes a moment when the empath realizes that what once felt like tactics are not weapons at all but shields. For so long, silence felt like abandonment, withdrawal felt like cruelty, and saying no felt like a betrayal of love. But in truth, these actions are not about hurting others, they are about protecting the self. They are boundaries, and boundaries are the language that the narcissist finally understands. When the empath chooses silence, it is not an attempt to wound. It is the refusal to feed chaos with more chaos. Silence becomes the doorway to clarity, a pause that breaks the cycle of endless arguments and manipulations. In silence, the narcissist no longer has a stage. They thrive on reaction, on drama, on the energy that comes when the empath explains, defends, or justifies. By stepping into silence, the empath withdraws the fuel that once kept the fire burning. The narcissist feels starved, while the empath begins to taste freedom. When the empath chooses detachment, it is not coldness, but wisdom. It is the decision to stop carrying the emotions of another as if they were their own. Detachment allows the empath to see clearly, to notice the manipulation without falling into it, to witness the storm without being swept away. The narcissist may feel abandoned in this detachment, but what is truly happening is that the empath is returning home to themselves. They are reclaiming their center, no longer living at the mercy of another's shifting moods. When the empath chooses to say no, it is not rejection but self-respect. It is the understanding that love cannot exist where one is constantly depleted. No is the word that restores balance. No is the word that declares that compassion has limits. No is the word that turns a victim into a sovereign soul. For the narcissist, hearing no is infuriating because it reveals that their control is not absolute. But for the empath, saying no is a doorway into strength, the first taste of a power that was hidden within all along. The beauty of this shift is that the empath is not acting from malice. They are not seeking revenge or control. They are choosing consciously to act in ways that bring balance. Silence, detachment, and refusal are not manipulative when chosen with awareness. They are the natural expressions of boundaries, and boundaries are not about punishment but about protection. The narcissist will often interpret these boundaries as tactics meant to harm them, because they can only view relationships through the lens of control. Yet, for the empath, these so-called tactics are simply acts of self-preservation. They are not mirrors held up to cause pain. They are mirrors held up to reflect truth, and truth, though uncomfortable, is the one thing the narcissist cannot manipulate. The empath may struggle at first with guilt. They may feel that by using these methods, they are becoming what they once despised. But here lies the difference. The narcissist uses silence to punish. The empath uses silence to protect peace. The narcissist uses detachment to avoid responsibility. The empath uses detachment to restore clarity. The narcissist uses no to dominate. The empath uses no to honor their soul. The intent is what makes the difference, and intent is everything. When the empath begins to live this way, their inner world transforms. They no longer feel the constant drain of energy that once defined their days. They no longer wake up weighed down by the emotional demands of someone else. Instead, they feel lighter, stronger, more centered. What once felt impossible now feels natural, because boundaries are not walls that shut out love. They are gates that allow love to flow in a healthy way. The narcissist, however, finds themselves unsettled. The silence they once used now silences them. The distance they once created now surrounds them. The refusal they once gave is now given back. It is a reversal, but not a cruel one. It is simply balance being restored. The empath is no longer an endless source of supply. They have learned the art of boundaries, and in doing so, they have become untouchable in ways the narcissist cannot control. This shift is more than survival, it is transformation. The empath is no longer giving their light away freely to those who only consume it. They are choosing where their energy goes, and in that choice lies freedom. They begin to see that their sensitivity is not a curse, but a gift, and when guarded by boundaries, it becomes their greatest strength. Every time the empath chooses silence over argument, every time they choose detachment over entanglement, every time they choose no over self-betrayal, they step deeper into their true self. These choices may look like tactics from the outside, but from within, they are sacred acts of alignment. They are the evidence that the empath has awakened to their own worth. And so what once looked like weakness is revealed as strength. What once looked like surrender is revealed as power. What once looked like tactics is revealed as truth. This is when the empath finally learns that boundaries are not weapons. They are love in its highest form, for they honor both the self and the truth of every connection. There is a moment in the empath's journey when they come face to face with a side of themselves they never fully acknowledged. For most of their lives, they have lived in the light, carrying kindness, compassion, and forgiveness as their guiding principles. They have built their identity around being gentle, caring, and understanding. Yet hidden deep inside, there is another force waiting quietly. It is a side that is strong, fiery, and unafraid of conflict. It is the part that says no without guilt, that walks away without hesitation, that refuses to be used or manipulated. For years, the empath has pushed this part down, afraid that embracing it would make them cruel, afraid it would make them like the very people who hurt them. But this hidden force is not cruelty. It is their shadow, and within it lies the strength they have always needed. When the empath finally dares to open the door to this shadow, a transformation begins. What was once feared as dangerous reveals itself as protective. The part that was silenced out of guilt becomes the very part that holds the key to freedom. To awaken, the shadow self is not to become heartless. It is to become whole. It is to recognize that true compassion is not only about softness, but also about strength. Without the shadow, empathy remains incomplete, leaving the empath vulnerable to those who exploit it. With the shadow, empathy becomes wisdom, a balance of love and power. At first, this awakening feels uncomfortable. The empath who has spent years giving without limits may feel uneasy when they finally withhold. They may feel guilt when they stop explaining, when they choose silence, when they no longer rush to rescue. It can feel as though they are betraying their very nature. But as they sit with these feelings, clarity begins to rise. They realize they are not betraying themselves, they are protecting themselves, they are not losing their essence, they are reclaiming it. The shadow self teaches the empath that saying no is not cruelty, but self-respect. It teaches that walking away is not abandonment, but preservation. It teaches that silence is not punishment, but wisdom. Each time the empath honors this strength, they feel something shift inside. They no longer crumble under guilt. They no longer shrink under pressure. They begin to stand tall, knowing that their heart is still open but no longer unguarded. The narcissist, however, feels the change instantly. For the first time, their games no longer work. The empath does not react as they once did. The tears and pleas that used to flow so easily are gone. The endless explanations have been replaced with quiet stillness. The eagerness to prove love has been replaced with self-respect. The narcissist is left unsettled because the person they once controlled is no longer accessible in the same way. The empath has awakened a force within that the narcissist cannot penetrate. This awakening of the shadow self is not about revenge. It is not about using darkness to inflict pain. It is about integrating what has been denied for too long. Light without shadow is incomplete, and shadow without light is destructive. But when the two are brought together, a person becomes whole. The empath learns that they can still be compassionate while also being firm. They can still be forgiving while also being wise. They can still love deeply while refusing to tolerate abuse. This is balance, and balance is where true power resides. With this awakening, the empath begins to live differently. They notice the way they move through the world feels lighter, yet stronger. They no longer apologize for existing. They no longer carry the weight of everyone else's emotions. They no longer seek approval to feel worthy. Instead, they walk with a quiet confidence that cannot be shaken. Their presence becomes magnetic, not because they are trying to please, but because they radiate authenticity. This authenticity is born from integration. The empath no longer hides the parts of themselves they once rejected. They embrace both the gentle and the strong, both the healer and the protector. In doing so, they discover a depth of power they never imagined possible. They no longer fear confrontation, for they know they can meet it with clarity. They no longer fear rejection, for they no longer abandon themselves. They no longer fear manipulation, for they can see through it with piercing awareness. What once was hidden in the dark has now become their greatest ally. The shadow, when embraced, does not destroy the empath's light. It amplifies it. It sharpens it. It turns fragile compassion into unshakable wisdom. It transforms kindness from a weakness into a strength that cannot be exploited. The empath realizes that their sensitivity is not their downfall, it is their gift, and when guided by both light and shadow, it becomes their shield and their sword. This is why the awakening of the shadow self is such a profound turning point. It is the moment when the empath stops living only in half of their power and steps into the fullness of who they are. It is the moment when they discover that love without strength is incomplete and strength without love is empty. Together, love and strength create balance, and balance creates freedom. This is when the empath finally becomes whole. When the empath begins to mirror back the very behaviors that were once used against them, something powerful takes place. For so long, the narcissist has relied on the predictability of the empath's compassion. They have relied on the fact that no matter how cruel, distant, or manipulative they become, the empath will return with love, forgiveness, and understanding. This cycle is their source of power. It feeds their sense of control and assures them that no matter what mask they wear, they will never be left exposed. But when the empath stops playing their expected role, the mask begins to crack. The narcissist thrives on reaction, and when there is none, they are forced to face the emptiness within themselves. For the first time, they are not being fed, they are not being chased, they are not being explained to, forgiven, or pleaded with. Instead, they are being mirrored, and this mirror shows them a truth they have avoided for their entire lives. The empath may remain silent where once they spoke. They may walk away where once they clung tightly. They may withhold energy where once they poured it out endlessly. These are not acts of cruelty but acts of balance. Yet to the narcissist, they feel like a collapse. Without the familiar rhythm of manipulation and reaction, they are left without an identity in the relationship. Their carefully constructed illusions depend on the empath's participation, and without it, those illusions begin to crumble. This collapse is not always visible at first. Often the narcissist will fight harder, increasing their tactics in desperation. They may rage, accuse, or attempt to guilt the empath back into submission. They may switch to charm, offering false promises or sudden displays of affection. But beneath these desperate attempts lies a growing fear. The narcissist begins to sense that the control they once held is slipping through their fingers. They feel the ground beneath them shaking because the source of their stability, the empath's endless giving, is no longer there to hold them up. The empath, standing firm in their new power, witnesses this unraveling with both clarity and sadness. They see the desperation behind the narcissist's behavior. They see the emptiness being revealed. But they also see something even more important. They see that the power they once believed belonged to the narcissist was theirs all along. It was their reactions, their energy, their attention, and their love that created the illusion of control. Without it, the narcissist has nothing to hold on to. This realization is deeply transformative. For years, the empath may have felt powerless, believing themselves to be trapped in a cycle they could not escape. They may have believed the narcissist was stronger, more dominant, more in control. But now they see the truth. The narcissist was never strong. Their strength was borrowed. Their mask was supported only by the empath's willingness to play along. And when the empath stops, the mask collapses. The collapse of the narcissist is not just the end of a pattern. It is also the beginning of the empath's freedom. As the narcissist struggles to regain control, the empath feels lighter. They no longer carry the burden of constantly managing another's emotions. They no longer live in fear of rejection or abandonment because they have chosen themselves. They no longer feel trapped in a cycle of endless giving because they have discovered the power of withholding when necessary. This is the moment when the empath realizes that strength does not come from fighting harder, explaining more, or proving their worth. Strength comes from refusing to engage in the game at all. The narcissist cannot manipulate what does not react. They cannot control what does not bend. They cannot feed on what does not give. The empath's refusal to participate becomes the ultimate act of liberation. The narcissist, faced with this collapse, may spiral. They may search desperately for new sources of supply. They may cling harder or they may run. But whatever they do, the empath no longer feels powerless in their presence. They no longer see the narcissist as larger than life. They see them as they truly are, fragile beneath the mask, dependent on the reactions of others for a sense of self. This clarity shatters the illusion and restores the empath's sense of truth. The empath emerges from this collapse with a deeper understanding of themselves. They see that their compassion is not a weakness, but a gift that must be guarded with strength. They understand that their sensitivity is not a flaw, but a tool that allows them to see clearly, provided they do not allow it to be exploited. They recognize that their power lies not in trying to change the narcissist, but in refusing to be consumed by them. And so, the collapse of the narcissist becomes the rise of the empath. What once felt like defeat is revealed as freedom. What once felt like powerlessness is revealed as sovereignty. What once felt like endless suffering is revealed as the path to awakening. This is the moment when the empath finally steps beyond the reach of manipulation and into the full strength of their own truth. Liberation does not arrive with fanfare or noise. It comes quietly, almost like a whisper, yet its power reshapes everything. For the empath, liberation is not about conquering the narcissist or proving them wrong. It is about stepping out of the cycle entirely. It is about no longer needing to explain, to justify, or to fight. It is about reclaiming what was always theirs, the freedom to live as a whole and sovereign being. What looks from the outside like using the narcissist's tactics is in truth the empath finally learning to honor themselves. Silence is no longer a reaction born of fear, but a choice born of strength. Detachment is no longer a shield of numbness, but a clear seeing of what belongs to them and what does not. Refusal is no longer defiance, but the simple recognition of self-worth. These actions, once foreign to the empath, become natural as they embody their new reality. For so long, the empath has been told that love means sacrifice, that compassion means endless forgiveness, that kindness means tolerating cruelty. But when liberation begins, these illusions fall away. The empath sees that love does not mean self-destruction. Compassion does not mean letting others cross every boundary. Kindness does not mean becoming fuel for someone else's emptiness. True love includes the self, and anything less is not love at all. In this new state, the empath no longer feels chained to the moods and manipulations of others. They no longer wake up bracing themselves for what the day might bring in the form of chaos or control. Instead, they rise with a sense of peace that is not dependent on anyone else. Their energy is their own. Their choices are their own. Their life is their own. This is what liberation feels like. Not a grand rebellion, but a calm and steady truth. The narcissist cannot follow the empath into this new place. They may try to pull them back into old arguments, old traps, old cycles of guilt and control. But the empath no longer responds as before. There is no more endless explaining, no more bending, no more rescuing. There is simply a quiet strength that cannot be moved. The narcissist, faced with this unshakable presence, begins to realize that the old game is over. Without reaction, they have no power. Without access, they have no control. This liberation does not make the empath cold or closed. In fact, it makes them more open than ever before, but with discernment. They still love deeply, but they love wisely. They still give, but they give where it is received with respect. They still feel deeply, but they no longer drown in the feelings of others. Their compassion becomes more powerful because it is no longer scattered everywhere. It is intentional, focused, and strong. The empath learns to live in balance. They are no longer only the healer, carrying the pain of others. They are also the protector, guarding the sacredness of their own soul. They no longer split themselves between light and shadow, but allow both to exist within them, creating wholeness. And in this wholeness, they discover something extraordinary. They are no longer afraid. They are no longer waiting for validation. They are no longer seeking approval. They are complete in themselves. This freedom ripples out into every part of their lives. Relationships shift because the empath no longer attracts those who only want to take. New connections appear, rooted in respect and mutual growth. Opportunities arise because the empath no longer hides or shrinks to keep others comfortable. Their presence changes because they carry a calm authority that cannot be shaken. The world feels different because they are different. Liberation also brings peace with the past. The empath no longer looks back with bitterness or regret. They see the lessons, the growth, the strength they discovered in the fire of their experience. They understand that what once felt like suffering was the very path that led them to awakening. They no longer need to hate the narcissist or resent what happened. They can release it all because they are no longer bound to it. This is not about becoming like the narcissist. It is not about mastering their tactics to win some invisible war. It is about learning the deeper truth. The empath was never weak. They were never powerless. They were never broken. They were simply learning how to balance their extraordinary capacity to love with the equally necessary capacity to protect. Once that balance is found, they are unstoppable. Liberation is the realization that the empath does not need to be saved because they have learned to save themselves. They do not need to be validated because they validate their own worth. They do not need to be controlled because they are free. This is the moment when the empath steps fully into their own life, no longer defined by the wounds of the past, no longer held captive by cycles of manipulation, no longer living in the shadow of another's emptiness. They are whole, they are sovereign, and they are free. If this message awakened something inside you, stay with this channel where truth and transformation meet. Share your thoughts, share your journey, and let your voice be heard. Remember, every time you rise in your power, you inspire another empath to rise with you. So subscribe, stay connected, and let us continue this path of healing and freedom together.